They launched the invasion at sunrise. Humanity had been waiting all night. The ground shook before we even heard them. I was crouched in a reinforced trench 12 kilometers outside of what used to be Leeds, England, when the first vibration rolled through the soil and up through my boots. My name is Mara Voss. I am 29 years old. I was a mechanic before all this. Now I hold a rail-assisted pulse rifle that I helped build with my own hands, and I am waiting for something from the sky to try to take my planet. The shaking was not from their landing. It was from ours. 240,000 human soldiers shifting into final position across a 16-kilometer front line. The kind of coordinated movement that takes a lifetime to master. We had done it in 11 months. 11 months. That is how long the HFY gave us. When their signal arrived, broadcast on every frequency simultaneously, translated by 3 different AI systems in under 4 minutes, the message was simple. Your world has been selected for absorption. Resistance is unnecessary. We will arrive at the next solar alignment of your primary star. You have approximately 340 of your days to prepare your population for transition. They thought they were being generous. They had no idea what they had just handed us. I remember the day the signal came through. I was in my flat, eating cold noodles, watching the news the way you do when you half expect nothing interesting to happen. Then every screen in the world switched at once. Every phone, every billboard, every television in every bar and waiting room and hospital lobby. The same message in every language simultaneously. And for about 40 seconds, the entire planet was completely silent. Then it was not silent anymore. I won't describe what those first weeks looked like. I think anyone who lived through them remembers well enough. Fear, grief, denial, rage, all of it in layers in every city and village and lonely farmhouse on the planet. People said goodbye to things. People argued about whether any of it was real. People prayed. People ran. But then something happened that the HFY, in all their thousands of years of conquest, had clearly never anticipated. We got organized. Not slowly, not reluctantly. Not the way humans usually organize, which is to say badly and after tremendous argument. We got organized the way a living thing gets organized when it finally, completely understands that it is in danger. Every government on Earth held an emergency summit within 72 hours. 48 hours after that, every military alliance on the planet had been dissolved and replaced by a single unified command structure. Borders did not disappear. People still went home to their families, still cooked their own food, still argued about football, but when it came to what we were building, what we were planning, what we were preparing, there was one voice and it spoke without hesitation. The factories ran without stopping, not for profit, not for politics, for survival. I was recruited into the Defense Corps in the first month. My background in mechanical systems got me assigned to a forward installation team. I spent the next 10 months helping construct the very trench I was now sitting in, along with 17 other interlocking defensive lines that stretched across the projected landing zones. The HFY signal had inadvertently helped us calculate. Because that was the other thing about their message. It told us exactly when they were coming. And if you know when, you can know where. And if you know where, you can prepare. The person to my left was a man named Owen Garrett. Owen had been a secondary school history teacher before the signal arrived. He was now one of the most accurate long-range marksmen in our unit. He had the kind of face that looked permanently calm, which I had come to understand was not an absence of fear but a decision not to show it. He was 41 years old. He had a daughter who had been evacuated with the rest of the civilian population to the Northern Shelter Networks 3 weeks ago. He had kissed her forehead at a transport station and then come back to his post without a word. To my right sat a 17-year-old named Cal Briggs. Cal should not have been there. The official recruitment age was 18, but Cal had falsified his records with a level of technical skill that, once discovered, had immediately earned him a promotion rather than a discharge. He was the one who had spent the last 4 months modifying the rail feed systems on our heavy emplacements, and the adjustments he made had increased their penetration efficiency by 31%. The colonel had personally reviewed his work and said nothing except that Cal had better stay alive long enough to explain his methods to the engineering corps. The colonel was a woman named June Harlow. She was 63 years old, built like someone who had never once in her life sat down when she could stand. She had fought in conflicts on 3 continents before any of this. She had more scars than she had stories, and she had a great many stories. She was standing at the edge of the trench line right now, looking at the sky with her arms folded behind her back, as though she were simply waiting for a bus. The horizon behind her was glowing. Not with sunrise. Sunrise was still 40 minutes away. This glow was different, cold at its edges, shifting, the kind of light that did not belong to any natural process on this planet. It was the re-entry heat of several hundred dropships burning through our atmosphere in tight formation. I pressed my back against the trench wall and checked my rifle for the 11th time. Owen looked at me. "You've checked it 11 times, he said. "I know," I said. "It'll work the same on the 12th, he said. "I know that too," I said. He almost smiled, not quite. Cal, on my other side, was not nervous in any recognizable way. He was running quiet calculations on a small handheld device, cross-referencing something. He had been doing this for the last 2 hours. I had stopped asking what he was calculating because the answers were always detailed and deeply technical and made me feel like I was the 17-year-old. The glow on the horizon grew brighter. I thought about the Keth.Ara.S message again, the precise, almost academic tone of it. Your world has been selected for absorption. Resistance is unnecessary. The word that stuck with me was unnecessary, not impossible, not futile, unnecessary, as though we would simply choose not to bother, as though the calculation was so obvious that a rational species would simply weigh the options and surrender without a fuss. They had absorbed 47 civilizations, we would later learn. The fastest any of them had managed to resist was 11 days. The Keth.Ara had developed their entire military strategy around the assumption that intelligent life, when faced with an overwhelming and technologically superior force, would prioritize self-preservation over resistance. They had never met a species that defined self-preservation differently. Because here is what they did not understand about us, could not have understood from the outside looking in. We do not deal well with being told what to do. We do not respond to ultimatums the way other species apparently do. When you tell a human being that resistance is unnecessary, something in us, something old and unreasonable and absolutely impossible to logic away, decides immediately that resistance is the only acceptable response. We are not brave because we are fearless. Every person in that trench was afraid. Owen's hands were very still, which meant he was working hard to keep them that way. Cal had stopped his calculations and was just sitting quietly, which for Cal was unusual enough to mean something. I had checked my rifle 12 times. We were afraid. We were also ready. And in 11 months, we had made sure those 2 things were not contradictions. The dropships broke through the cloud layer. They came in formation, perfect, geometric, almost ceremonial. There were exactly 312 of them in the first wave. We had estimated 300, 2 off. Cal had said 310. We were both wrong. Colonel Harlow did not move from her position at the edge of the trench. She watched them descend with the same expression she used when reviewing supply manifests, focused, unhurried, processing. Then she looked down at the trench line, met the eyes of every soldier she could see, and spoke in a voice that carried exactly as far as it needed to. "Hold," she said. "We hold until they're down." The ships continued their descent. The ground shook harder now. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the sound of 312 engines adjusting for landing. The sound was enormous and strange, and completely unlike anything human machinery made. But the important thing, the thing I remember most clearly from that moment, was the silence from our side. Not one voice, not one premature shot, not one person breaking position. 312 ships came down out of the sky expecting panic. What they found was stillness. And the stillness was so much more frightening than any noise could have been. I pressed my rifle against my shoulder. 40 meters ahead of the trench line, the first Cathara dropship touched the soil of Earth. I breathed in. I breathed out. And then Colonel Harlow said the one word we had been waiting 11 months to hear. Now. The Cathara disembarkation sequence lasted precisely 14 seconds. I know this because Cal had timed their previous maneuvers from intercepted footage and told us what to expect. They were efficient. I will give them that. The ramps extended, the formations moved, and within 14 seconds of touchdown there were approximately 9,000 Cathara ground units standing on English soil. They were taller than I expected. Lean, angular, with elongated limbs and a forward-leaning posture that made them look like they were permanently mid-stride. Their armor was a deep, shifting blue-gray that changed slightly as the light caught it. Their weapons were long and elegant in a way that made ours look industrial by comparison. They looked exactly like what they were, a species that had done this 47 times and never once lost. They scanned the landscape. They saw the empty fields, the quiet road behind us, the still trench lines. Their formation commanders signaled something to one another. We would see the recordings later, and the signal said, roughly translated, "Minimal organized resistance, proceed to advance." That was their last error. Owen fired first, because his rifle was the longest-range weapon in our immediate section. His first shot struck the forward sensor array of the lead command unit from 800 meters. Not enough to stop it, enough to confuse it, enough to tell the other Cathara units that the shot had come from a direction they had not expected, at a range they had not accounted for. Then the trench line opened up. Not just our trench, every concealed battery, every roof-mounted platform, every underground rail emplacement that Cal had spent 4 months adjusting to hit at angles their shield geometry had never been designed to handle. The Cathara shields were remarkable technology. They were designed to absorb and deflect directed energy and high-velocity projectiles from standard attack vectors, straight lines, predictable arcs. What they were not designed for was the specific 43-degree lateral approach angle that Cal had worked out mathematically and quietly integrated into every emplacement in our sector. The first volley of shots went through their front lines' shields like they were not there. I watched Cathara armor crack. I watched units go down. I watched the perfect geometric formation break into something irregular and confused, and I felt something rise in my chest that was not quite satisfaction and not quite grief, but was very much both at once. They returned fire immediately. They were good at what they did. I want to be honest about that. They did not freeze, did not hesitate. Within 3 seconds of our first volley, they had identified firing vectors and begun returning fire with precision. The trench walls around us took the brunt. Reinforced composites that our engineering teams had spent 5 months layering specifically for this exchange. The walls held. Here and there someone in the line shouted a hit, a graze, a close impact, but the line did not break. Cal was already at the rail feed controls for our section's heavy emplacement. His hands moved quickly and without panic. The emplacement hummed, adjusted, and fired a single shot at a Cathara dropship that had lifted slightly off the ground in an attempt to reposition. The shot caught the undercarriage at the precise point where the hull plating met the landing strut assembly, and the ship came down hard on its side, not burning, just broken, blocking the advance route for 6 units behind it. Owen looked at Cal. Cal shrugged. The math was straightforward. The Cathara commanders attempted a tactical reorganization. We had anticipated this. Colonel Harlow had drilled 4 separate Cathara reorganization patterns into us over the last 6 months, based on behavioral analysis of their previous campaigns. The moment their formation began shifting into what she called Pattern 2, she called it over the comms. Pattern 2, East Flank 30 seconds. The East Flank adjusted. When the Cathara completed their reorganization and pushed forward, they pushed into a trap that had been set for them before they even landed. What I remember most clearly is not the sound. The sound was extraordinary, A constant layered roar of our weapons firing, their weapons returning, ships adjusting, ground units moving, but what I remember is something underneath all of it. A rhythm. Human coordination has a rhythm when it is working the way it is supposed to. Call and response, action and support, advance and cover, each piece fitting against the next. 11 months of drilling had put that rhythm into us so deeply that it operated without thought. The Cathara were precise, but precision is not the same as rhythm. We had 37 minutes of continuous engagement before their first wave commander issued the withdrawal signal. We saw the dropships begin lifting off from the northern end of the landing zone first, then the central cluster, then the southern units. They pulled back in an orderly pattern, still disciplined, still professional, but they pulled back. Our line did not pursue. Colonel Harlow had been absolutely clear on this point. No one crosses the forward marker. Not today. Pursuit invites conditions we have not trained for. We were not here to chase. We were here to hold. The last Cathara ship cleared our visual range 6 minutes after the withdrawal began. And then it was quiet. Not the waiting quiet from before. A different kind. The quiet of a thing that has just happened and has not yet been understood. Owen set his rifle down on the trench wall and looked at his hands for a moment. Then he looked at me. "They ran," he said. He did not sound triumphant. He sounded like someone checking a fact. "They ran," I agreed. Cal was already compiling data from every sensor grid in our section, feeding numbers into his handheld device. His expression was focused, but under it was something else, something careful and a little bit odd. "We hit 78% of the shield bypass targets," he said. "The angle worked consistently across all emplacement types, not just ours, the full sector." That meant it had not been a lucky calculation. It had been a correct one. Colonel Harlow came down into the trench for the first time since the engagement began. She looked at our unit, one face at a time, the way she always did, taking stock, checking conditions, noting what she needed to note. Then she looked at the sky where the Cathara ships had been. "Good work," she said. "Reload and rest what you can. This was the probe." Someone 2 positions down said, "We beat them." Harlow turned toward the voice without heat. "We beat one wave of a probe that they launched specifically to measure us. They now know we do not break immediately. They now know we have prepared." She paused. "The real fleet has not moved yet. It is still sitting in orbit with approximately 60% of their total ground force capacity still aboard." No one spoke. "We gave them information today," she said. "What they do not know, what they cannot know yet, is how much of our capacity we just used and how much we have left." She looked back at the sky. "They'll study the data from this engagement for several hours. Then they'll come back with something larger and something adjusted." "How long do we have?" Owen asked. She considered this. "Enough," she said. I looked at the sky. Somewhere up there, beyond the clouds, beyond the atmosphere, a fleet that had ended 47 civilizations was sitting in orbit above my planet, reassessing. And somewhere on the dark side of the moon, something we had built quietly and quickly, and with the kind of desperate ingenuity that only comes from having no other choice, was sitting in the dark, waiting, listening, ready. They thought they were the ones with the plan. They had never been more wrong about anything in their lives. The lull lasted 4 hours and 20 minutes. I know this because I spent most of it unable to stop checking the time, not out of impatience, out of a kind of restless, unresolvable energy that had nowhere to go. The engagement was over. My hands still remembered the weight of the rifle, still felt the vibration of the trench wall when the emplacements fired. My body had not yet received the message that the immediate danger had paused. Owen had fallen asleep sitting up, which I found slightly remarkable and very Owen. Cal was still working, though by this point even he had slowed. He was cross-referencing the engagement data against something on his device with the focused quietness of someone who had found something interesting and was not yet sure what to do with it. I sat and I thought about my brother. His name was Nate. Nathan Voss, 7 years older than me, the kind of person who remembered birthdays and fixed things before you knew they were broken. He had been living in the city of Hanover when the Cathara ran their orbital bombardment test 6 months ago. They had done it, we understood later, as a demonstration, a proof of intent, to show us that from orbit they could hit a target the size of a city block with precision. They had selected a location they identified through our own satellite data as a zone of low critical infrastructure. What their analysis had not correctly weighted was population density at midday. 216,000 people. The Cathara announced it afterward as a calibration exercise. They used that exact word, calibration. Nate had been at a market 3 blocks inside the impact zone. I had last spoken to him 2 days before. He had been annoyed about a parking fine. We had argued mildly about something unimportant. The way you argue with someone when you expect to speak to them again shortly. I did not cry about it because I had done my crying in the first week after it happened, in the supply depot behind our installation, sitting on a crate by myself quietly and completely. What I had now in its place was something that was not quite grief anymore. It was a kind of fuel that did not burn loudly. It ran clean and steady, and it had been running for 6 months, and it had not once run low. I looked at the sky. The comms crackled. Colonel Harlow's voice came through, steady as always. Attention all units. Orbital Command has a transmission in 4 minutes. Mandatory listening. People straightened. Cal saved his work. Owen opened his eyes without looking like he had been asleep, which I suspected was something you learned after enough years in the field. The transmission came through at exactly the 4-minute mark. It was not Harlow's voice this time. It was a voice I recognized from command briefings, a calm, mid-range voice belonging to the Orbital Coordination Director, a man named Grant Ellison. He had the kind of voice that gave you information without alarming you, which was a specific skill. Ground units, this is Orbital Command. Current status. The Cathara main fleet remains in high orbit, stationary. We are tracking repositioning movement in their secondary carrier group consistent with preparation for a second engagement wave. Our projection is 6 to 9 hours before next contact. A pause. I want to share something with you, because you have earned the right to hear it. Another pause. 47 civilizations encountered the Cathara before us. 47 civilizations did not survive the first week. We are now past the first engagement. We held. Every unit on every front held. Not one breach, not one abandoned position. The Cathara probe withdrew with significant losses and without achieving any of its mapped objectives. No one said anything, but the quality of the silence changed. You will have questions about what comes next, Ellison said. Some of those questions I am not able to answer over an open channel. What I can tell you is that there is more in place than you currently know. You have done your part. Trust that the rest of it has been done with the same care. The transmission ended. Owen looked at me. There is more in place than you currently know, he repeated, with the slow tone of someone who has just noticed something. He said it clearly enough, I said. He said it so clearly that it was not an accident, Owen said. He wanted us to hear it. Cal looked up from his device. I've been running the numbers on our remaining emplacement capacity. After this engagement, we're at about 62% of full operational load. We used less than we showed. He looked at both of us. Which means whatever the Cathara recorded and transmitted back to their fleet about our capabilities, they underestimated what we have left. I thought about that. And then, because I had been thinking about Ellison's phrasing, about Harlow's comment from earlier, about 1,000 small pieces of information that had been sitting in the back of my mind for months, something clicked into place. The defense installations, the rail emplacements, the coordinated trench networks, the supply chains that had never once run low, all of it had been presented to us as the plan, the full picture of what humanity was building in its 11 months. But 11 months is a very long time when every factory on the planet is running. And not all of the factories we knew about had been producing things for the ground. I looked at Owen. "Do you remember," I said slowly, "8 months ago, when the coastal assembly yards were put under communications blackout for 30 days? He looked at me. "They said it was a security measure," I said, "for the ground installations." "I remember," he said. "The coastal assembly yards," I said, "are not near any ground installation." A slow quiet settled over the three of us. Cal set down his device. He looked at the sky with an expression I had not seen on him before, not calculation, not focused assessment, something closer to wonder. "They were building something else," he said. "They were building something else," I agreed. It was 3 hours after this conversation that we were brought into the full picture. Harlow gathered our unit along with 6 others into the command shelter, sealed it, and pulled up a map that I had never seen before. Not a map of Earth. A map of near-orbital space. 41 ships, Harlow said without preamble. Built in 8 months on the dark side of the moon inside the detection shadow of our own natural satellite. Crewed by people who have been training in simulated zero-gravity environments since month 2. Fully armed, fully fueled, fully crewed, in position and holding. Nobody moved. "The Cathara fleet has been watching Earth," Harlow continued. "They have not been watching the moon. They did not consider the moon a relevant variable. This is because no civilization they have ever encountered had the manufacturing capacity to build a combat-capable space fleet in 8 months while simultaneously running a full planetary defense mobilization." She looked around the room. "We did," she said. "I thought about Nate, about calibration exercises, about 47 civilizations that had not made it to the second week. The plan," Harlow said, "is this. When the Cathara repositions for their second major engagement wave, when they commit their main force to a descent trajectory, the lunar fleet jumps from cover and takes position behind them, above them, between them and their exit vector. At the same moment, every ground-to-orbit weapons battery we have been keeping off their detection grid activates simultaneously." She looked at the map. "They will be committed to a descent. They will have no avenue of retreat. They will face fire from below and fire from above, from a force they did not know existed, using weapons they have no data on." She turned back to the room. "They gave us 11 months, she said, in a voice as quiet and steady as anything I have ever heard. "They gave us 11 months because they have never needed more than 11 days. They thought they were being generous." She paused. "They gave us 11 months. Outside, somewhere beyond the bunker walls, the sky was dark and full of stars. And on the dark side of the moon, 41 ships waited in perfect silence, crewed by humans who had learned to fly in 8 months, armed with weapons built in weeks, burning with the same clean, steady fuel that was burning in me. The Cathara did not know we were angry. They were about to find out. I was in the open air when it happened. Harlow had given us a 30-minute stand-down between shifts, and I had climbed out of the trench to breathe something that was not recycled air. It was full night now, cold and clear, the kind of sky that makes you feel very small in a way that usually feels peaceful, but tonight felt completely different. I could see the stars, and somewhere among them, invisible without instruments, the Cathara fleet was orbiting. And somewhere between them and the moon, 41 human ships were holding their position, waiting. I sat on the ground above the trench and looked up and tried to feel the scale of what was coming. I was not entirely successful. Some things are too large to hold in your mind all at once. You take the edges of them, the parts you can reach, and you hold those instead. I held Nate. I held Owen's careful hands and Cal's quiet calculations. I held the image of 312 Cathara ships coming down through a cloud layer, expecting to find a broken world. Finding stillness instead. The alarm was not loud. It was a single sustained tone, low, resonant, the kind of frequency that travels through ground and air and bone. It meant one thing. The Cathara were repositioning for a second wave. I was back in the trench in under 40 seconds. Owen was already at his position. Cal was at the emplacement controls with his device in one hand and the targeting interface active with the other. Harlow was at the edge of the trench again, standing, arms behind her back, watching the sky. The comms opened. Ellison's voice still calm, remarkably calm. All units, all fronts. The Cathara main fleet has broken orbit and is beginning descent formation. This is not a probe. This is the full engagement. Estimated atmosphere entry in 18 minutes. A pause. Lunar fleet is go. I repeat, lunar fleet is go. They are moving now. And then something changed in his voice. Not much, just enough. Godspeed, everyone. 18 minutes. The first 14 I spent mostly in a state that I cannot fully describe. It was not fear, or not only fear. It was something deeper than fear, something that sat below it, an awareness of being present at something that had never happened before and would never happen again. A species that had been told it had no chance, deciding that did not matter. At the 15-minute mark, the first Cathara ships hit the upper atmosphere, and the sky began to burn. They came in larger formation this time. Not the careful geometric pattern of the probe, this was a wall. A flat, wide descent arc designed to blanket a maximum surface area, to make targeting and coordination as difficult as possible for a defending force. It was the correct strategy against a force with limited coverage. We were not a force with limited coverage. Every sector activated simultaneously. I will try to describe what it looked and sounded like, but I know even as I try that words are going to fall short. Imagine 6,000 emplacements opening fire at once, targeting specific points in a descending fleet, using angle calculations refined over 11 months of preparation. Imagine the sky lit up not with the chaos of random fire, but with the precision of a plan that every person, machine, and system on Earth had been building toward for nearly a year. The Cathara return fire was immediate and heavy. They were not surprised this time. They had our positional data from the probe engagement, and they had adjusted. The first wave of return fire was significantly more accurate than before. The trench walls absorbed most of it, not all of it. I heard someone down the line go down. I did not look. I could not look. Owen was firing at a rate that I had not seen him maintain before, measured, rhythmic, each shot placed carefully, and Cal was running the emplacement at a tempo that should not have been possible without a full crew. The Cathara front line hit the ground 4 kilometers ahead of our position. They came out fast this time, no pause, no formation inspection, straight into advance. They had studied the probe data. They knew where our forward positions were. What they did not know was that we had moved them. In the 4 hours of the lull, ground teams had quietly shifted the forward emplacement positions 40 meters in 3 of the 4 sectors. Not far enough to show up as significant movement on their orbital scans. Far enough that the approach vectors their units had been programmed to avoid were no longer where our weapons were. Cal had suggested it. Harlow had approved it in under 2 minutes. The Cathara advance units moved confidently down their planned approach corridor. The corridor was empty. Our weapons were 40 meters to the side, with clean lines of fire along the entire length of the advance. We opened up. What followed was 22 minutes of the most intense sustained engagement I have experienced or will likely ever experience. There is no clean way to describe combat at that scale and that closeness. I can tell you that Owen kept firing. I can tell you that Cal took a graze on his left forearm around the 12-minute mark, looked at it for approximately 2 seconds, wrapped it in a field dressing with his right hand without putting down the targeting interface, and continued working. I can tell you that Harlow moved along the trench line for the entire 22 minutes, adjusting, directing, calling adjustments and corrections with the steady efficiency of someone who had trained for exactly this her entire life. I can tell you that I fired my rifle until the heat management system threw a warning light, at which point I switched to the backup unit and kept firing. And then at the 22-minute mark, the sky changed. I heard it on the comms first, Ellison's voice, stripped of all its careful calm for the first time since I had ever heard him speak. Lunar fleet has engaged. Cathara main carrier group is taking fire from above. I repeat, the trap is closed. I looked up. I could see it from the ground. I want to be clear about this. I looked up through the smoke and the chaos of the engagement around me, and I could see it. Points of light in the upper atmosphere that were not stars. Ships burning. Not falling the way a stricken aircraft falls, moving, maneuvering, lit from the outside by weapons fire. The Cathara main fleet was caught between the ground batteries firing upward and the lunar fleet firing down from above and behind. They had committed their entire force to the descent. They had no rear guard. They had no reserve. They had planned for a target that was braking and running, and when they committed completely. The lunar fleet had jumped from the moon's shadow at precisely the moment the Cathara were fully committed to their descent vector. There was no warning, no time to respond. One moment the Cathara rear was clear. The next, 41 human ships were there, already firing. The ships were not elegant. They were not the geometric perfection of the Cathara fleet. They were built in 8 months by a species that had never built a warship in space before, and they looked like it. Functional, angular, carrying more firepower than their size should allow, crewed by people who had trained in simulators, and were now doing the real thing for the first time. They fought like they had nothing to lose. Because they had grown up on a planet that was burning below them, and they were not going to watch it fall. The Cathara ground advance faltered the moment their orbital comms began breaking down. The coordination between their ground and orbital forces was tightly integrated. When the fleet started taking fire from an unexpected direction, the ground commanders lost the tactical overlays that told them where to push, where to hold, where to concentrate. The advance became uneven. Then it became confused. Colonel Harlow saw it before anyone else. "Forward advance on my command," she said, her voice carrying the exact same tone she used for everything. "Hold formation. Maintain cohesion. 300 meters at measured pace." We went over the top. 300 meters measured pace the way we had drilled it. Not a charge, a walk. A deliberate, coordinated walk that kept our lines intact and our coverage overlapping. The Cathara units in front of us were receiving contradictory signals from their fleet, losing positional data, unable to synchronize. They fell back. They regrouped. They fell back again. I remember looking to my left and seeing Owen walking forward through the dark, rifle up, absolutely steady. I remember looking to my right and seeing Cal, bandaged arm and all, keeping pace and keeping his weapon on target with the focus of someone who has already decided how this ends and is simply executing the steps. The Cathara ground units began full withdrawal at the 38-minute mark of the second engagement. Not the orderly retreat of the probe, this was a collapse. Without orbital support, without coordination, facing ground forces that were advancing instead of retreating, they fell back to their landing zones. Their landing zones were no longer safe. The lunar fleet had redirected a portion of its fire to take out the command-class dropships that were attempting to lift off and re-establish coordination. Without the command ships, the remaining transport vessels were operating on local protocols only, no strategic direction. The sky above us was a battlefield, and we were winning. I watched a Cathara carrier, something the size of a large stadium, break apart in high atmosphere. Not slowly, it came apart the way something comes apart when every structural point gives at once. The light it made was extraordinary. For a moment, the entire landscape around me was lit as bright as noon. Owen stopped walking. He looked up at that light for exactly 5 seconds. Then he looked forward and kept moving. At the 44-minute mark, the first Cathara surrender signal came through. A ground unit, 3 sectors to our east, raised a signal that our systems identified as a request to cease engagement. Then another. Then 6 more in the span of 4 minutes. The orbital fleet scattered rather than surrendered. 7 ships broke away from the engagement at full thrust and accelerated into deep space. They would be tracked. Some would be pursued. That was a matter for later. Ellison's voice came back over the comms. It was different now. Not louder, not excited. Quieter, actually, in the way a voice goes quiet when it is carrying something very large. All units. The Cathara main fleet is in full disengagement. Repeat, full disengagement. Ground forces are surrendering across all sectors. The engagement is— He stopped, cleared his throat. The engagement is concluded. The trench line around me went very still. And then Owen said, quietly to no one in particular, "That's that then." And Cal sat down on the ground in the middle of the field we had just crossed, looked up at the sky where the light from broken ships was still fading, and said nothing at all. I stood between them and I felt everything, all at once, the way you do when something immense finally lands. The loss and the relief and the grief, and the strange, impossible pride of being part of something that should not have worked and did. I thought about Nate. I thought about the word calibration. I looked up at the sky. The light was fading now. The stars were coming back one by one through the clearing smoke. We were still here. 3 weeks after the last Cathara unit on Earth surrendered, I was standing in a field outside what was being rebuilt as a forward coordination center near Leeds. The weather was typical English autumn, overcast, cold, occasionally wet, entirely indifferent to whether historic events had recently occurred. I had a cup of tea in both hands and no particular reason to be standing in a field, except that I had found that open spaces helped me think in a way that the newly crowded indoor spaces did not. 11 weeks earlier, I had been a mechanic. 7 weeks earlier, I had helped build a trench that would be featured in every significant military history written for the next several generations. 3 weeks earlier, I had walked 300 meters across a battlefield at measured pace, while the sky above me burned with the remnants of an alien fleet that had ended 47 civilizations. Now I was drinking tea in a field and trying to work out how I felt about all of it. The honest answer was that I did not yet know. There was too much. The mind does a thing after something like that where it processes information in layers rather than all at once. You handle the immediate things first, the adrenaline, the relief, the practical tasks. Then later, in quiet moments with cold tea, the deeper layers begin to surface. Not all at once, in pieces. The losses, first and always. Our sector had come through the engagement better than many, but across all fronts the numbers were real and they were significant. Every number was a person. Every person had a name and a history and someone who would carry a specific absence for the rest of their life. The fact that we had one did not make those numbers smaller. I think anyone who told you otherwise was not being honest. Nate was not there to see any of it. I had thought about this every day since the battle, not with the sharp pain of the early weeks that had softened into something that was less like pain and more like a particular kind of sadness that you carry evenly, like a weight that has been with you long enough to feel like part of your body. I talked to him sometimes in my head. I told him about Cal's arm, about Owen's 5 seconds of looking at the light, about the walk across the field. I thought he would have had something brief and dry to say about all of it. He was good at that. I was still standing in the field when Grant Ellison found me. I had not spoken to him personally before. He was 3 levels above my station and had been, during the engagement, responsible for coordinating the tactical picture for the entire Northern Hemisphere orbital layer. He was shorter than his voice suggested, which was perhaps unfair of me to notice, but I noticed it. He stood next to me without announcing the reason for his presence, which I respected, and looked at the sky for a moment in the way people had started doing since the battle, not with fear anymore, just with awareness, remembering that it was not an empty ceiling. "You were at the Leeds front," he said. It was not a question. He had clearly reviewed records before coming. "Yes," I said. "I read about the forward position shift," he said. "The 40-meter lateral move during the lull. That was an idea from your unit." "Cal Briggs," I said. "The 17-year-old, he suggested it." Ellison nodded slowly. "He's been offered a full research position at the new Orbital Engineering Center," he said. "He turned it down. He said he wanted to finish his secondary school exams first." I laughed. The first real laugh I had managed in 3 weeks. It felt odd in my throat, like something that had been out of practice. Ellison almost smiled. "There's something I need to tell you," he said. "And the reason I'm telling you personally rather than through a briefing is that you're going to be asked to speak on behalf of your unit in 2 days, and you should know the full context before you do." I turned to look at him. "3 days ago," he said, "we received a contact signal from a civilization called the Vorn. They are approximately 400 light-years from here. They are not the Cathara. They have been aware of the Cathara expansion for about 3 centuries and have been," he chose his words carefully, "watching, documenting, not intervening." "Why not intervening?" I asked. "Because until 3 weeks ago," he said, "no civilization had ever successfully resisted the Cathara past the first engagement. The consensus among the observing species, and there are at least 4 of them that we are now aware of, was that intervention was a waste of resources. The math was clear. The Cathara won. Every time. The only variable was how long it took." He paused. "They watched our entire engagement," he said. "The Vorn and 3 other species, through observation platforms they had placed in our system without our knowledge. They watched the first probe, the lull, the second engagement, the lunar fleet deployment. They watched all of it." I thought about that. 4 alien species, quietly watching from the shadows, expecting to document another absorption. "And," I said. "They would like to speak with us," Ellison said. "Formally. The Vorn's message included a translation of a document they call the Record of the Absorbed, the history of every civilization the Cathara have taken. 47 entries." He reached into his jacket and handed me a folded printed sheet, a summary. I understood. The fastest any previous civilization fell was 6 days. The most organized resistance lasted 22 days before full collapse. The most advanced, in terms of technological level, lasted 9 days. I looked at the sheet. 47 names, none of which I could pronounce. 47 entries, dates, durations, outcomes. All the same outcome. All until now. They want to meet the species that did something no other civilization in 4 centuries of Cathara expansion has managed to do, Ellison said. "They want to meet us." I folded the sheet and held it. "What do we want?" I asked. "That," Ellison said, "is what you are going to be asked to speak to." 2 days later, in a facility that still smelled faintly of construction materials, because it had been finished only the week before, I stood in front of a camera that was transmitting to a relay station that would, through a chain I did not fully understand, eventually reach a civilization 400 light-years away. There were 6 of us from the combat units. Owen was there, still calm, still steady, looking at the camera with the same expression he used when he looked at a new terrain map, reading it, measuring it. Cal was there with his arm in a proper medical brace now, wearing a jacket that I suspected had been borrowed for the occasion, because it was slightly too large for him. There were 3 others from different fronts. A woman named Diana Marsh from the Australian Coastal Defense Grid, a man named Peter Cole who had coordinated the South American inland batteries, and a young man named Ade West who had crewed one of the lunar fleet ships and still had the slightly untethered look of someone who had recently spent time in zero gravity and had not yet fully readjusted to Earth. Ellison had asked me to speak first. I had spent the 2 days since our conversation in the field thinking about what to say. I had written things down and crossed them out. I had talked to Owen, who had listened carefully, and then told me to say what I actually thought, not what I thought I was supposed to say. I had talked to Cal, who had told me to keep it short because we were talking to people who did not know us, and the first thing you do when you meet someone you do not know is listen more than you talk. I thought about both of those pieces of advice. Then I stood in front of the camera, and I said this. "My name is Mara Voss. I am 29 years old, born in Frankfurt, Germany. Before a species from outside our solar system told us we were going to be absorbed, I repaired mechanical systems for a living. I am one of approximately 9 billion people on the planet Earth. We were told we had 340 days. We used all of them. We lost people. We lost more than I can say in a short transmission, and more than I have finished grieving for in any transmission. What we did not lose was the decision to defend what is ours. We have heard that you watched our engagement. We understand you have watched others. We understand that the outcome surprised you. I want to be honest with you about something. It surprised some of us too. We are not a species that is always peaceful. We argue. We sometimes fail to look after one another the way we should. We have done things in our own history that we are not proud of. These things are true. But when something comes from outside and tells us that we do not have the right to exist on our own terms, we find out very quickly that we agree with one another much better than we had assumed. You have asked to meet us. We would like to meet you. We would like to hear about the 47 civilizations in your record. We would like to understand what they were and what they built and who they were before the Cathara came. We believe that record should be larger than it is. We also want to be direct with you. We are not interested in being observed from a distance. We are not looking for approval. We are interested in honest conversation between species who share the same sky. We are interested in knowing what else is out there. Because we won, and we are still standing, and we are already looking up. I stopped. The room was very quiet. Ellison gave a single nod. The transmission was sent. Adair West, who had been watching me from his seat, said quietly, "That was good." Owen told me to say what I actually thought, I said. "That's what you actually thought?" Cal asked. "That's what I actually thought," I said. Cal considered this. Then he nodded with the careful expression he used when the data confirmed a prediction. "Good," he said. We went outside afterward. It was the same cold, overcast English sky that had been there all week, indifferent and familiar. I looked up at it the way I had started doing since the battle, with a different kind of attention than before. Not fear. Not quite wonder either. Something between the two. The awareness that there were other eyes in the universe, and some of them were pointed at us, and we had just become something they had not seen before. 3 hours after the transmission was sent, Ellison received the Vorn's reply. It was brief. He read it to us in the coordination room in his steady, careful voice. "We have been watching your species for 41 years, since we first identified your electromagnetic transmissions. We have watched you argue, build, and conflict with yourselves. Our prediction models gave you a 17% chance of surviving the first probe engagement and a 2% chance of surviving to the second wave. We revised our models after the first probe. We have been revising them since." He paused. "We accept your terms. We look forward to honest conversation." He set down the paper. "They also said something else," he added. "They said that the Cathara survivors who fled into deep space have already sent their own transmission to the broader galactic community. The transmission describes Earth." "What does it say?" Owen asked. Ellison looked at the paper again. "It says, do not attempt absorption of the third planet in the Sol system. Reason, they were prepared. They used every day. They did not run." He paused once more. "And they are still looking outward." I thought about Nate. I thought about 11 months in a trench, building something that should not have been possible. I thought about a 17-year-old with a bandaged arm who wanted to finish his exams. I thought about Owen, firing steadily in the dark, and June Harlow standing at the edge of a trench with her arms folded, watching a sky that was about to change. I thought about 47 civilizations in a record that no one had added to in 3 centuries. And I thought about how we were the first ones to be written about differently. Not as an absorbed entry, not as a duration and a collapse. As something else. Something the Cathara had not encountered before, that the watching species had not predicted, that even we had not been entirely certain we were capable of until we were already doing it. That evening, I walked back out to the field outside the coordination center. The clouds had cleared for the first time in a week, and the sky was full of stars, more than you usually see from inside a city, because the city was still being rebuilt and the lights were still lower than normal. I looked up. The stars looked exactly like they always had, Distant, cold, ancient, indifferent in the way that only very large things can be. But they were not empty anymore. Not to me. There were eyes in that darkness. Other civilizations, other species, other histories stretch across distances I could not hold in my mind. Some of them had watched us. Some of them were receiving our transmission right now, at the speed of light, getting their first introduction to a species called humanity. I wondered what they saw. I hoped they saw what I felt when I stood in that field, not triumph exactly, because triumph without loss is not the whole truth. Not relief either, though there was relief in it. Something more complicated and more honest than either of those. We had been told we were going to be absorbed. We had been told that resistance was unnecessary. And we had spent 340 days proving that the people who said that had made a single, fatal mistake in their calculation. They had assumed we would weigh the odds. We had weighed the reasons instead. Nate was one of the reasons. The 216,000 were reasons. Every person in every trench on every front was a reason. Every child evacuated to a shelter network. Every factory worker running a double shift. Every engineer who had never built a weapon before and learned in 6 months all reasons. The whole complicated, arguing, grieving, determined, unreasonable, impossible human species, reasons. The stars were out. The planet was still here. And we were already pointing our telescopes outward, already drafting the transmissions, already building the ships that would take us further than we had ever gone. Not because we had proven we could survive. Because we had proven something more interesting than that. We had proven that when something truly matters to us, when we are all looking at the same sky, all standing in front of the same thing, all carrying the same weight, we are not what we appear to be on any normal day. On a normal day, we are difficult and divided, and too often unkind. But on the day it matters, on the day something looks at our planet and says your world has been selected, we become something that 47 other civilizations could not become. We become a single voice. And that voice says, not today. I finished my tea. The stars did not move. They never do, not on a human timescale. But somewhere out there, the light from 41 human ships was still traveling through the dark, reaching toward distances we had not yet crossed. We were going to cross them. Not because we were fearless, not because we were perfect, not because we were the best species in the galaxy or the wisest or the most advanced, but because we were the most stubborn. And because this was our sky. And we were not going to let anyone take it.